I never thought the worst decision of my life would begin with a harmless conversation. I never imagined that something as simple as a lingering glance across a kitchen counter could spark a chain of emotions that would burrow so deeply into the hollow parts of me I had so carefully ignored for years. But when I think back now, sitting alone with the heavy silence that feels thicker than the darkness outside, I know it was not a single moment that condemned me, but a slow erosion of the fragile walls I had built around my heart, a gradual, almost imperceptible descent into the kind of vulnerability I once believed I was too strong to succumb to, because the truth is that loneliness doesn't attack you with violence or spectacle. It seeps in quietly, disguising itself as resilience, masking itself behind laughter at dinner parties, behind the polite nods at PTA meetings, behind the forced smiles when people asked how I was and I said fine without even thinking. And maybe if I had noticed it sooner, I could have stopped it. Maybe if I had admitted to myself that something was missing long before that night, things would have been different, but I didn't. And so the emptiness festered, and when he, bright-eyed, kind, so achingly attentive in a way I had forgotten was possible, started talking to me not as my best friend's son, not as the boy I once babysat while our husbands discussed business in the living room, but as someone who saw me, truly saw me beneath the practiced perfection. I felt something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in years, something reckless and dangerous, but also warm and alive, and it terrified me, because even as the rational part of me screamed warnings, even as my better judgment recoiled, there was a quiet, stubborn part that whispered maybe, just maybe, you deserve to feel seen again, and it was that voice, traitorous, desperate, that grew louder with each conversation, each accidental brush of humor and shared glances that lingered a heartbeat too long, until suddenly I found myself looking forward to the sound of his voice, to the way he asked questions no one else bothered to ask, to the way he listened as if every word I said mattered, and the guilt of it gnawed at me from the very beginning, a raw, gnashing thing inside my chest, because I knew it was wrong, knew that even the smallest secret yearning was a betrayal not just of my marriage but of who I believed myself to be, and yet the loneliness had sharpened its claws too deeply into my soul, and the thought of turning away felt like closing a door on the only light left in a life that had become a cold, endless twilight. So I told myself stories to justify it, harmless, innocent, just friendly conversation, nothing more, nothing that couldn't be explained if anyone asked, nothing that would ever cross the invisible line I swore to myself I would never cross. But the line kept moving, kept blurring, and with every hour spent laughing in the kitchen while my husband buried himself in work emails, with every private smile exchanged over shared memories that belonged only to the two of us, the weight of what I was doing pressed heavier against my chest, until breathing itself began to feel like a betrayal, and yet I couldn't stop, didn't want to stop, because for the first time in so long I felt like more than a ghost haunting my own life. And it was intoxicating and terrifying all at once, and there were nights I would lie awake in the silence next to my husband, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look, every moment, until the guilt twisted my stomach into knots. And still I craved it, craved him, craved the feeling of being alive again, and the worst part was knowing that I was doing it all with my eyes wide open, that I wasn't a victim of circumstance, but a willing participant in my own undoing, and every day the stakes grew higher, the emotional tether between us pulling tighter, closer, until I could no longer deny that what was happening inside me was dangerous and irreversible, and still I told myself lies, clinging to the delusion that I could stop whenever I wanted, that I was still in control, but deep down I knew I was already lost, already too far gone, and the fear of what it would mean if anyone found out clawed at me constantly. The image of my best friend's face, my husband's betrayal. The shattering of everything I had built my life upon, but it wasn't enough to stop me, because the hollowness inside me was louder, stronger, and somewhere along the way I had made a choice, silent and unspoken, but a choice nonetheless. To feed that hollow space with borrowed affection no matter the cost. And that night, the night he crossed a boundary neither of us could ever uncross, was not a spontaneous accident, not a moment of weakness, but the inevitable culmination of 1,000 tiny moments, a slow and steady march toward a reckoning I could feel coming long before it arrived. And when it did, when the weight of it all crashed down on me with the force of every buried regret and unspoken need, I realized too late that there are some mistakes you don't survive. Not really, that some lines, once crossed, carve themselves into your soul forever, and no amount of regret or repentance can undo the fact that you chose to step over them. And as I sit here now, alone with my shame and my fear and the knowledge that I have betrayed not only my marriage, but also my oldest, dearest friendship, I wonder if it was worth it. If those brief moments of feeling alive were worth the ruin they left behind. And though I already know the answer, though the emptiness inside me feels even greater now than before, I also know that if I could go back, if I could relive it all, part of me would still hesitate before walking away, because the truth is, loneliness makes fools of us all, and when you are starving for connection, even a single drop of warmth can feel like salvation, even when it's the beginning of your destruction. It would have been easier if he had done something obviously wrong, if he had said something crude or crossed a clear line, if there had been a moment I could point to and say that's when it became something I should have run from, but there wasn't, not at first. Only a gentle progression of trust, of understanding, of attention so precise and intimate it felt like being slowly unwrapped in silence, and I think that's what made it dangerous. Not just his age, or the fact that he was my best friend's son, or the fact that I was a married woman, though those things screamed at me every time I caught myself lingering too long in his presence. But the way he made me feel seen without ever having to touch me, the way his gaze held mine like he could read every word I wasn't saying, the way he listened like I wasn't just a role or a responsibility, but an entire person with thoughts and dreams and feelings that had been buried for so long under layers of duty and routine and disappointment that I had almost forgotten they were still alive inside me. And I don't know when it shifted from friendly to dangerous, from accidental to intentional, but I remember the first time he said something that stayed with me longer than it should have, a simple compliment. Not even about my appearance. I don't think I would have noticed that. But about something I said, something I shared absent-mindedly about a book I loved or a memory from years ago that he somehow remembered, and the way he smiled when he repeated it back to me, the way he said, "I always liked how your mind works," made something flutter in my chest that I immediately tried to kill, but the echo of those words followed me home, curled itself into the corners of my quiet moments, and I hated how easily they soothed me, how starved I must have been for recognition. That such a small kindness could feel like intimacy, and I told myself I was overreacting, that I was just lonely, that it didn't mean anything, but it did, and when the messages started, short at first, innocent, "Thank you for the talk. I liked that story you told. What was the name of that book again?" I should have ignored them, should have shut it down, but I didn't, because I craved the sound of his curiosity, the way he asked about my day and waited for an honest answer. The way he noticed when I seemed tired or quiet and didn't let it pass with silence like my husband always did, and I told myself it was still harmless, that we were just talking, just being kind to each other. But inside I felt something blooming that terrified me, because it wasn't about him, not really, it was about how I felt in his presence, like a version of myself I had long abandoned, like someone worth listening to, worth being known. And even though I hated myself for it, I leaned into that feeling. I checked my phone more often. Reread our conversations at night when the silence felt loudest, and the guilt twisted inside me, but I kept feeding the illusion that it was just friendship, that he was just being nice, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. And maybe I wasn't, not yet, but my heart knew what I was doing, even if my mouth hadn't said it aloud, because I started thinking about him at odd hours, wondering what he was doing, if he was thinking about me. And I started noticing how my mood shifted when he was around, how his presence brightened the dull ache that sat in my chest like a stone, and the worst part was realizing how much I wanted him to see me, not just notice me, but see through me, into the parts of me that no one had touched in years, not even my husband, and that longing, that desperate, aching need to be known began to eclipse everything else. And when he sent me a message late one night saying, "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but talking to you feels like the best part of my day," I felt everything collapse and expand at once, because I knew then that we had crossed a threshold that couldn't be undone. And even though I didn't say it back, even though I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something safe and vague, the truth had already wedged itself between us, and every message after that was laced with it, a quiet current pulling us closer, deeper, and I hated how much I looked forward to hearing from him, how quickly I forgot the weight of responsibility when his name lit up my screen. And I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that it was just attention, just temporary, just a harmless escape. But every time I saw him, every time he asked how I was and really meant it, I felt the lie deepen, the betrayal calcify. And I started avoiding my husband's eyes, started shrinking from his touch, not because I was doing anything wrong, or so I told myself, but because I was carrying a version of myself he didn't know anymore, a self who had started living in the words of another man. A self who was beginning to belong more to those secret messages and stolen glances than to the cold routine of my own marriage. And I hated the woman I was becoming, but I couldn't stop, and even when I told myself I would, even when I promised myself this would be the last time I responded, the last time I let his words reach me, I always broke those promises because I was already addicted. Not to him, but to the feeling, the brief, shimmering illusion that I mattered to someone again, and I knew it wasn't fair, knew it wasn't right, knew that I was taking something that didn't belong to me. But the part of me that felt alive when I was with him didn't care, didn't want to care, and the guilt only made the need worse, like punishing myself with more of what I shouldn't have, and there were moments I saw flashes of concern in his eyes. Like he knew this was dangerous too, like he was waiting for me to be the one to pull away, but I didn't, and maybe that was the worst betrayal of all. Not of my husband or my friend, but of myself, because I let it happen. I let the conversations grow longer and more intimate, let the silence between us become something loaded and fragile and unspeakable. And the more I let myself believe that I could control it, the more it controlled me. And even as the fear of being found out grew, even as I started checking my phone like a criminal, erasing messages, watching every word I said in public, the emotional pull between us tightened, and I began to exist in two parallel worlds, one where I was the responsible wife, the loyal friend, the woman everyone thought they knew, and another where I was unraveled, exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. And the tension between those worlds was breaking me slowly, like being torn apart from the inside, and still I kept walking the edge of that line, unwilling to fall, unwilling to step back, caught in the unbearable ache of needing something I had no right to want. It wasn't a kiss that ruined me. It wasn't his touch, or a moment stolen behind closed doors, or anything you could capture in a photograph, or a text message, or a whisper heard through a hallway crack. It was the moment I realized I thought about him more than my husband, the moment I looked across the dinner table and saw not the man I had built a life with, but the ghost of someone I was supposed to still love. And I felt nothing, no spark, no ache, just the dull weight of familiarity and fatigue. And later that same night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and my phone lit up with a message that simply read, "Can't sleep, thinking about you," I didn't hesitate, didn't weigh the consequences, didn't feel the brakes slam down inside me like I used to. Instead, I let the warmth of those words settle into me like a slow-burning ember, and I responded before my mind could catch up with my fingers, before the better version of me could wrestle back control. Because the truth was, I wanted him to think of me. I wanted someone to be restless because of me, to feel pulled by my absence. And when he said he was outside, just parked, nothing more, just needed to see me, didn't know why, couldn't stop himself. I froze, every part of me caught between fear and longing, and 1,000 voices screaming no and one voice whispering yes. And even though I didn't open the door, even though I stood behind it with my hand trembling on the knob and my heart beating like it was trying to run from me, something inside me opened in that moment, and it never closed again, because I didn't tell him to go, didn't end it, didn't do the thing I should have done to protect us both. I let the silence speak for me, and when he finally left and the car disappeared down the street and I crept back into bed beside my husband, I knew I had crossed a line that would never uncross itself, and what haunted me most wasn't what had almost happened, but what already had. Because I had let someone else into the most private spaces of my mind. I had started dreaming with someone else's voice echoing in my thoughts. I had chosen to feed a connection that had nothing to do with sex and everything to do with intimacy, with emotional oxygen I hadn't breathed in years, and the guilt was unbearable, a living thing crawling inside me, making everything feel dirty, conversations, glances, memories, even silence. And yet I kept going because I had come to need him like a drug, like air, like a version of myself I could only access through his attention, and I hated myself for it, hated the lies I told, hated the fear that gripped me every time my husband picked up my phone or asked where I'd been or looked at me like he was trying to remember the last time we really saw each other. But worse than the guilt was the hollowness, the realization that even with all this fire burning secretly beneath my skin, I still felt empty, still felt unseen in the life I was supposed to be living, and the more I confided in the wrong person, the more I closed off to the right one, if he was even still the right one, and the messages became more frequent, more raw, more filled with things we didn't say but felt anyway, and I started saving them in my head even as I deleted them from my phone, clinging to the way he remembered what I liked, the way he asked questions about my childhood or my favorite songs or what I'd wished for when I blew out candles on a birthday cake alone in my 30s, and every time he said something that made me laugh or feel understood, I drifted further away from the woman I once thought I was. Until the person in the mirror became a stranger to me, someone softer and crueler all at once, someone who wore guilt like a second skin and still walked willingly into the next moment of betrayal. And there was a night, not long after that message, when I saw my best friend, his mother, laughing over coffee in my kitchen, completely unaware, completely trusting, and something about the way she looked at me with that familiar warmth, that unquestioning affection, made me want to scream. Made me want to confess everything and beg her to take it all away, because the weight of what I was doing was no longer bearable. But instead I smiled and poured more coffee and died a little more inside, and the duality of it was eating me alive. This life where I pretended to be whole while secretly tearing pieces of myself away and handing them to someone I was never meant to need. And then came the moment I had always known would arrive, the confrontation with myself, the night I typed out a message to him saying we had to stop, that it had gone too far, that it was wrong and I couldn't breathe under the weight of it anymore. And he didn't respond right away, and that silence felt like punishment and freedom all at once, like losing something I shouldn't have had but already couldn't live without. And when he finally replied, he didn't argue, didn't plead, just said, "I understand." But that doesn't change how I feel, and I cried harder than I had in years, not because of love or loss, but because I knew I would never again feel that kind of attention without it costing me everything, and I started to unravel then. Truly unravel. Every conversation I had with my husband felt brittle and forced. Every interaction with my best friend felt loaded and false, and I began avoiding everyone, pulling into myself, afraid that they could see it on my face, that somehow the truth was leaking from my skin, and the fear of exposure became constant in crowded rooms, in quiet dinners, in the silence after a question I couldn't answer. And I kept waiting for someone to say it, to look me in the eyes and ask what I'd done, and sometimes I wanted them to, wanted the burden lifted, even if it meant everything collapsed, because I couldn't carry it anymore, and yet I said nothing. I maintained the illusion. I folded into the role I had once lived in without question, and now it felt like a costume, and the distance between me and who I used to be grew so wide I could no longer remember what I looked like before this. And the worst part, the cruelest part, is that I never even got what I thought I wanted. Not love, not escape, not even the fantasy. Because all I had in the end was silence and shame and the crushing realization that I had broken something sacred, not for passion, not for lust, but for the brief illusion of being seen, and now I am haunted by all the things I can't take back. The secrets I carry like stones in my pockets, the words I didn't say that would have stopped it, the ones I did say that gave it breath, and sometimes I lie awake thinking about who I might have been if I had walked away sooner, if I had chosen integrity over hunger, and I know that no one will ever know, not really, because I'll never tell, and he won't either, and the messages are gone and the moments are buried and the world keeps turning, but inside me there's a fault line that will never close again. A fracture running straight through the version of me I show the world, and the one I know is hiding beneath. And I walk through my days with a smile I don't feel, a laugh that feels like an echo of someone else's joy, and I wonder if this is the punishment, not the fallout, not the discovery, not the exposure, but the living with it, the knowing, the pretending, and maybe that's what I deserve, to feel this emptiness and carry it alone, because no matter how carefully I act, no matter how convincingly I move through my life, I will always know what I did, who I became, and how easily I lost myself in the name of being seen.